Welcome to Capacity Building Stories Climate Action 101, a podcast brought to you by the Paris Commune on Capacity Buildings Network in partnership with the United Nations University. I'm Eva Costas, your host, and in this series, we're breaking down the essentials of climate action, 101 style. Join us as we explore key concepts related to climate change while connecting the dots between capacity building, research, policy, and practical solutions. Let's dive in. Welcome to CB Stories Culture-Based Climate Action 101. Today, we're exploring culture-based climate action, how cultural heritage and the arts connect to climate solutions, the gaps and opportunities in integrating culture into climate action, and the policies and research helping scale these solutions for lasting impact. Joining me today, I have three wonderful guests with me. Could all three of you please introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Thank you so much, Eva. Thank you for having us and opening this space and this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation about the importance of culture in climate action. My name is Daniel Cervenka. I'm a classically trained sociologist, and I work at the intersection of culture, climate, and systems in capacity building. I think exploring how knowledge and storytelling and collaboration can accelerate global transformation. And I do that through two projects, mainly. One is called the Convergence, which is a creative impact studio, and Resolve, which is a systemic capacity building research project. But I'm also in a parallel capacity co-creating with the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion, which I will let Gunjan to introduce a little bit further.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and also Eva and others at the PCCB to also provide this opportunity to also showcase, what initiatives like ours and individuals like us are also doing at this intersection. Hi, my name is Gunjan. I am the co-founder of the Entertainment and Culture Pavillion and also the director of operations. And we're working at the intersection of culture, climate, community. And this is a global initiative and a platform that champions culture-based climate action and at major forums and spaces like that of COPs, Climate Weeks, SBs, etc. Personally, my background is in design and storytelling, and over the past few years, I've helped build platforms that connect artists, youth, and frontline leaders to the climate agenda through creative programming, partnerships, and research. I've also co-founded Dubai Climate Collective and created a card game called Chatty Changemakers, which is a game that uses humor and play to spark deeper conversations about sustainability. And through our collective work, I would say, that is how we focus on how cultural heritage, the arts and storytelling can be the driver and transform climate engagement, and that can also turn policies into something people can feel and relate to.
Hi, Eva. Hello, everybody. I am Andrea. I'm a senior researcher at United Nations University, the Institute for Environment and Human Security. We are based in Bonn. And our work focuses on the integration of science through research, policy, through this evidence delivered through this research that we do, and capacity building. Personally, my research focuses on capacity building for urban transformations in which cultural means and arts-based approaches are, of course, part of approach and our means for engagement with local communities. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. There's such wealth of expertise in the episode today, and I'm so excited to dive a bit deeper with all of you all. So I think we can jump right in. You already mentioned just now, Gunjan, it's clear that there's been growing recognition that culture, heritage, and the arts can serve as key tools for climate action. But from your perspective, how do they fit into the broader climate and capacity building agenda? And what do we exactly mean by culture-based climate action?
That's a great question, Eva. In my opinion, and this is something that precisely why culture has to be integrated into climate and capacity building at every level and every stage. Climate plans fail precisely because they don't speak the language people live in. And I feel that culture is that language and has been that language since time immemorial. It shows us who we've been and what we refuse to lose, which is where heritage comes in. And so when we look at adaptation, implementation, it becomes that safeguarding identity of what we need in order to fit into the broader climate and climate agenda. And elements of storytelling, they have the capacity to be able to turn that risk when it comes to policy into meaning. It has the ability to move resources and, changes who shows up and who keeps momentum. And the arts, it's not just nice to have, it's not just an add-on. It is where the operational muscle lies, really. When we look at communities around us, when we look at initiatives around us, there is so much co-creation, there is so much strength building and translation across efforts and languages. And that is also precisely what ENC, the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion, really steps up to do a lot more of that effort building. And we pair that, those climate goals, those adaptation goals with films, exhibitions, pop-ups, music, cinema, talking about production logistics within filmmaking, talking about climate storytelling as a whole process. And that is where we see, participation growing up and partnerships really come into place and policies feel a lot more human, which is where all of the capacity building really lands.
Those are really good points. And I think to echo some of those and just to add a little bit more to it, I think culture, heritage, storytelling, arts, they're all integral to the broader climate and capacity building agenda because they shape how, the human foundations of change. Culture is both the driver and enabler of climate action, influencing the values, behaviors, collective imaginations that we have for different solutions. And the very kind of elements that determine how societies respond to crisis and but also to growth and regeneration after those. I think cultural heritage provides us with grounded knowledge for adaptation, the traditional systems for land management and Brazilian architectures, and offering different models of sustainable and context-specific solutions. So there's a lot in culture that can really help us move forward faster. And I think Gunjan touched on storytelling, and I think that itself plays a really, really, really important role. I myself spent many years focused on storytelling and documentary work, and really using that as a platform to build bridges between policymakers and the public, and translating complex scientific data into experiences and true stories, human narratives that are understandable, relatable, and allow people perhaps to start to get a deeper understanding of why they should pay attention to these issues and topics, and also how to participate, right? They're translation vehicles for understanding. So and they allow people to connect with the different realities and different places around the world, and this is a global issue and we need to collectively participate on it. So just in particular to highlight storytelling as a really important method to share how we can approach this differently. But culture is it's a powerful capacity multiplier. It's a pathway to public engagement and awareness, and it's really integrate. It needs to be integrated, as Gunjan has said really well. It needs to be embedded into our policies in a more strategic way to recognize this importance, to recognize its value and contribution to this sort of journey that we're all on towards a more sustainable future.
Wow, thank you. Thank you both so much. I think you've made it really clear, again, the integral part that culture, heritage, storytelling, and the arts play on both the climate and capacity building agenda. And we'll go into the policies aspect, Daniel, that you mentioned just now later in the episode. But I very much related to what you mentioned as well, especially when it comes to storytelling. Storytelling was ultimately as well what moved me into being involved in the climate action space and humanizing the climate crisis. But again, we've looked at culture and the arts as being vehicles for climate action. But to unlock that potential, certain capacities need to be in place. So could you tell me what are the main capacity gaps or needs when it comes to integrating culture and the arts into climate action?
If we could recap a little bit on the needs of this integration of culture, traditions, and climate, we don't only face the risk of losing very relevant knowledge that our communities hold, but we also might fail in our implementation of these policies. What we were just mentioning is not only the introduction of culture-based approaches or arts into the means of implementation for climate, but also how the implementation of these policies can reinforce community ties, communities' understanding of what they're doing well, or their relationship with nature and their built environment. And that's a key point for us. So in my understanding, or in our understanding of key capacity gaps and needs when it comes to this integration, is that usually when we consider support for climate action, we generally pay attention on this leadership of technical expertise or the recognition of political decision makers. But that is part of the equation, but it doesn't solve the complexity of the problem. Therefore, a major gap is this limited recognition of the role that soft skills play. And it is what Gunjan and Daniel were just explaining, this a role of creative communication, the storytelling, and the empathy as the ability to translate this knowledge across not only communities, but also disciplines. And that is critical for climate engagement. And of course, that could allow us to also consider how science and research could bridge systems thinking into more inclusive transformation. Therefore, we must be creative, of course, in this integration, but we also must take into consideration how effective it could be if these transformative narratives are both scientifically based and emotionally or socially resonant to our audiences and the communities that we work with.
I think, when we look at culture as a whole, there's so many elements that we, start to look at, slowly. We look at heritage, which is still intangible, it's entertainment, music, many different elements. And overall, we see that it's not just something to safeguard from climate impacts, but it's also part of the solution. That's where, the understanding and the knowledge gap and the awareness level really comes in. And when we think of culture, we think of heritage, we think of monuments, artifacts, but it's also important to note that it is the know-how passed down through generations. And traditional agricultural calendars like water management systems, sacred practices in the forests, way to measure rains and when a drought is coming. And these are the traditional systems of knowledge that have helped build those communities. What we're seeing right now is that it's not replicating really well in terms of the innovation solutions that we need at this stage. Of course, we will discuss about, the NDCs and the NAPs later on in the episode, but it's really the community building that is not necessarily touched upon, and the access which comes with it. And we are here in this, space talking about climate conferences. We are here talking about the COPs, climate weeks. Do you actually realize the people that need to be in those rooms to be able to pass over that knowledge that they are bringing from their ancestors and generations? That alone comes with so many problems and issues. We don't have visa access. We don't have, funding and finance secured for a lot of these people, youngsters in the room, to be able to travel to these spaces. There are so many bureaucratic systems that just don't work for even people like me. I'm an Indian national. I have to apply for a visa at every stage to enter these spaces, to be able to be at those rooms, be at the tables, and make my voice heard. If someone like me who still knows people and can get things done, what exactly is happening to the people in the communities who really want to be a part of these spaces, but they just don't have the access, they don't have the opportunity. And that's where a big gap lies in any kind of implementation that needs to be done, leveraging the power of community.
I think those are super important points, and I just wanted to briefly touch on what Andrea was saying, maybe more with a note or an idea for the future, that as we go deeper into the kind of the systemic thinking, the policy design, like that, maybe we really need to rethink how that's done in a broader way, that we're really focused only on one part, that we're really only thinking on how to, the sort of the word that you've used, the technical implementation parts, but we're really not thinking how that translates to the people, to the communities. How do we ask them for their input? How do we engage them in the process in some co-creative way, so that there is an effective buy-in, so that there is a care for something that really works for the people directly. But I think to build up on and kind of maybe expand a little bit more on what was shared already. I think there's sort of four primary gaps. I think one of them being, or five, I think, if I include what Gunjan was mentioning, which is really important, is just enabling or creating enabling environments for people to participate. We talk about capacity building, right? To be there, be present, and participate in the dialogues. I think that's absolutely fundamental. Another important gap, I think, and that's one of the things that we're trying to find new solutions for supporting, is just general knowledge gaps that exist in this space. There's a lot of information, a lot of resources, a lot of opportunities out there, but they're sort of fragmented and disconnected. And as one of the efforts of what we're trying to do is try to find ways in which we can bring that together and make that accessible to people, to the public, as effectively and easily as possible. I think the second gap, which has already been mentioned, and we'll go deeper into it, is the policy gap. I think I'll leave that one on the side. And I think when it comes to culture, one of the important other gaps to consider or to think about is the evidence gap. I think we think about culture as sort of this spirit and this ephemeral force that's out there, but it is an integral part of the fabric of our society, and there are ways in which we can translate its value, its impacts, in terms that can then be worked with and used and implemented for the technical components of policy design. There are ways to do that. And I think that is one of the important steps for us as we move forward and as we consider how culture can be deeper and better embedded into policy frameworks, is to find ways to do that, to translate that into a common language that works on both ends. So again, happy to expand on that a little bit more, but just thought that's really important one to highlight. So really the evidence base, the evidence component of it, not just tokenizing culture and saying, oh, it's beautiful and nice to have. No, it's not. It's critical. It's fundamental. And let's then therefore translate that into words that those that need to see it that way can understand. That I think is very, very, very important. And last but not least, I think this one is just in general, I think it's a coordination gap. I think, but I do have to say that, seeing how this broader community around the culture climate nexus is working already, I think that it's actually an incredible example of co-creation and collaboration that I have not witnessed in other places. But nevertheless, I think further stronger coordination is really important for us to move together. And perhaps if we do so, then it can function as an example for other areas to also unite and co-design solutions better. So just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for that comprehensive breakdown of the different capacity gaps and needs. Just now, Daniel, as well, you were tapping on the topic of collaboration, and that brings me into my next question, because we've looked at the gaps and needs. How do we close them? And I wanted to hear from all of you if you can tell us about any promising solutions, partnerships that are helping already close these gaps, and also what research and evidence is helping guide these efforts.
In research, is very important for us when we could link our actions with practice. That means these kind of approaches in which we are not only working with communities for the sake of science, but also aiming to transform or to provide some evidence that could allow any transformation processes on the ground. And that is a very key topic now, having the support for these integrated approaches that could blend technical knowledge, but also cultural and arts-based methods. It's relevant. At my institute at UNU, we have been working with initiatives that, for example, employs documentaries, photography, and participatory storytelling as means to integrate local knowledge, experiences, but also to portray all these diversity in cultural expressions into climate action. And that, of course, is very relevant to showcase in different scenarios. But for us, that is the evidence that we aim to take also farther when we want to inform policies on the public discourse. For instance, international projects and local coalitions, such as the Transformative Urban Coalition project, in which I am leading the capacity development component, we are using this concept of transformative communication not only to engage and mobilize different actors, but also to integrate these different narratives into more comprehensive evidence that could be used in different areas. We understand that we could develop that as a means of success in these communities, because we had the support of of the donors at that time, in which we of course have a limited time to work with these communities, but the evidence and the materials that we develop are for further use after we deliver these actions. And I think that's the power of culture, that it transcends time. It is not a one-time implementation, but when your message and when your approach is creative enough, that could enable long-term tools to impact beyond this limited project involvement. Ultimately, this success also depends on how the communities prioritize their needs. And that, of course, means what Gunjan was saying, having a seat at the table, because otherwise it is impossible for them to transmit what are their needs or what are their priorities at the local level. And that's why this cross-sectoral collaboration and local access to global resources are essential for these kind of approaches, but also, as Daniel was mentioning, to have this intersection of climate with culture. And for us, in terms of research, this is very important to promote mindset shifts alongside this technical expertise that could deliver some evidence-based climate action success stories.
I think that's very, very key. And a lot of those points really resonate with me as well, because in the fact that we are seeing so much of collaboration within communities, as you've already stated, and it's promising to also see the growth and that comes with it, and we have so many grassroots initiatives now across global majority nations with global support. We've got many initiatives and programs within rural communities, but also villages that are now, of course, starting to realize the connection between that. All of the solutions that are coming with it need to be addressed at a global level and replicated at a local level as well. We've got programs like Preserving Legacies, and which is led by many global partners as well. And they are trying to connect these dots. And a program like Preserving Legacies works with many local heritage champions. And you look at, and this is something that Daniel can also touch upon, because he's also, personally worked with them. But it's an incredible tool to be able to develop a lot of community-led climate adaptation plans, for cultural heritage sites. And each year they will select a cohort of sites and provide the training and the tools and the mentors to be able to help local people safeguard their heritage in the face of climate disasters. And the idea is, of course, protection is the end goal, but the idea is also to create a global community of practice. So even if there's a small town in India or in Nepal, or even the tribal community in Africa, they can learn from one another's solutions and tap into the science and the expertise that we have right now. And a lot of these programs are being documented, are being archived. So that can turn into research toolkits, that can turn into a lot more of the practices we need in this day. And in this sense, these efforts are leveling up that local capacity with that global knowledge. And this is, of course, just to, quote an example from one project, but there is so much that is also being done within filmmaking and community cinema. And that's where a lot of, we have a lot to learn from heritage as a whole. We have a lot to learn from our ancestral knowledge and how even smallest of remote towns and villages and tribal communities actually come together to make a difference. There is a huge difference in where they humanize climate change by sharing how communities are using that wisdom versus something that only policies and science can alone conquer. And we see a lot of that difference. We see a lot of that data and reporting being done now in this day in the last couple of years. And I think that's where, something like storytelling really turns abstract climate risks into bridging the gap between forecasts and everyday life. And that's how we really see the difference.
Yeah, thank you, Gunjan. Those are really, really, really valid points. I wish we had hours to talk about this and expand on this further. But just to kind of maybe close this question and react to a little bit of what Andrea was sharing and yourself as well. Andrea, you spoke about research, and I think one thing I'd like to promote or highlight here for our listeners is the UNESCO Global Report on Culture Policies that was just published at Mondia Cult at the start of September or sorry, end of September. That is, I would dare to say, quite an extraordinary example of global collaboration, global knowledge sharing on an unprecedented levels. I mean, there's some parallels to a study that's as comprehensive and as goes into such depth as that, but not that many. So I just wanted to plug that in here for anybody who's interested in learning a little bit more, kind of current state of affairs and what is happening in the culture and climate nexus as well, because it had its place within the study. It wasn't just quote unquote just culture, but it really bridged that gap and really connected the two issues together. So I just wanted to leave that here as something to highlight. And then another, Eva, you were asking about some existing kind of solutions and things. And another one that I'd love to highlight is the We Make Tomorrow campaign. Which is aimed at mobilizing artists and creatives and heritage keepers and really uniting everyone behind this common cause. And I think the ultimate aim is really an integration of culture into the UNFCCC's second global stocktake in some way, so that there is recognition for culture in that context as well. So the We Make Tomorrow campaign is doing a lot on this front, and as a part of that, and kind of to touch on all of the points that were being mentioned here, a big component of that is an ecosystem mapping component. That is, we're trying to understand who the stakeholders are, who are the people taking action on behalf of culture and climate around the world, and unify them into a space that they can learn about each other, discover different kinds of solutions, find inspiration, connect with each other, but also so that that ecosystem map can function as that evidence and evidence base that we've been discussing at the start, so that we can perhaps show the strength of collective action, the strength of the movement, perhaps if I can call it as such, so that there is a recognition for its importance and value and strength, and therefore hopefully, and then supports the integration further into different policies and into the stocktake itself. So just wanted to share a little bit more about that. And I think, Gunjan, you were mentioning preserving legacies. I think that's an incredible example of co-created action and capacity building action around the world that has a few parallels. I think another one is the UNESCO Culture for Resilience program, and there's a few others. But those are incredible examples of connecting kind of the top and the bottom and really creating bridges between them. So yeah, just to name a few, I think there's a lot more that we could talk about and dive into.
Absolutely. But thank you all for sharing these wonderful and excellent examples. But again, we've looked at some of the solutions, and you were mentioning just now, Daniel, looking at how these solutions can be integrated further. And for these solutions to really be scalable and sustained, they need to be supported and recognized at a broader policy level. So could you tell me a little bit about the current state of, or the extent to which culture and the arts are currently being integrated into national climate policies, but also where do you see the biggest opportunities to deepen this integration into nationally determined contributions or national adaptation plans to, again, ensure that culture-based climate action is sustained?
Absolutely. I think I'd love to also hear from the other speakers on this, but I think there's a series of examples I think that I'd like to highlight. First and foremost, we know that culture is not being recognized in the way that it should be across the national adaptation plans in the ways that we would hope it would be. I think there are now groups, such as the Group of Friends for Culture-Based Climate Action, that perhaps Gunjan can add more context to that, which is a consortium or group of countries that is now joined together to discuss these issues and find new pathways of collectively co-designing ways to integrate culture into their adaptation policies more effectively. I think that is an incredible example, again, of multilateral collaboration that has started in Dubai at COP28. If I'm not mistaken. So that is an incredible example. And maybe I'll pass this around so we can have more of a dialogue on this, but just kind of sprinkle a few to start. Please.
No, absolutely. I think, Daniel, what you mentioned is so key for something like an initiative like Group of Friends. It started with 17 countries, and now we have more than 35 or 40 at the moment since its inception in 2023 at COP28. And I think that's where, parties and, foundations and institutions and countries are really stepping up to activate a lot more on their national implementation plans, within their region, and make sure that culture is a part of their planning, but also is a part of the policy making that they're now starting to do. But again, still, there's a whole lot that needs to be done. There is a gap between how citizen-led movements can actually feed into these strategies as well, and how can they take part in the adaptation and implementation that is being led by, the said countries and movements. And the question arises, how do you get citizens on board with these changes needed? And this is really where arts and creative sectors can actually shine, and where policy can do a lot more. And under the Paris, agreements work on action for climate empowerment, which is ACE, countries are encouraged to educate and engage the public on climate change. And it's very much one of the pillars of ACE. And we know that that's something integral to also what ENC talks about and works on. And the national climate plans could explicitly include arts and culture programming as part of their outreach and education efforts. So let's say if we're talking about a country who wants to update their NDC commitment and wants to commit to support climate themed art installations or theater programs in schools and universities about climate. So, there are many creative ways to be able to help translate national goals, like an adaptation project or an emissions target, into something that citizens, can connect with and can actually work on. And there are certain governments that have started funding such efforts, and we've seen ministries of culture and environment ministries partnering with one another to run storytelling campaigns, and to actually activate and institutionalize a lot more in establishing grant funding for climate projects. I know that India as a country is also stepping up to do a lot more on culture and funding, or providing funding or micro grants to individuals to be able to revamp their city or the urban infrastructure in a different way. And that's where we see, like, the city planning, the urban city planning also involving cultural groups. And nations really can greatly strengthen from public support for these kinds of policies. I also think that the an often overlooked aspect is that if culture can be written and solidified into the NDCs and the national action policies, it becomes easier to fund it as well. And that's where climate finance from international funds or any kind of aid also usually follows those priorities set in those plans. So it's as simple as that. If you don't see something written down in a policy document, you won't likely put it into a priority. And that is where a big opportunity gap arises for a country, where they can identify a lot of safeguarding that they can do for heritage, they can do for ancestral knowledge, they can do for a lot of climate risk and adaptation there. And we do see a lot of movement there, um, through countries really activating a lot more on that. But this is where it's really an opportunity for a lot of these parties to seize the chance and update your NDC, update your NAP, to mention culture, to leverage that to get funding for those initiatives. And, it's a virtuous cycle. The more success stories, the more implementation that we see, the more viewership, the more implementation, the more support and global support you're actually going to receive.
Just to add on that, I think one of the biggest opportunities is also related to justice. I agree with this mention of Gunjan. What you don't mention doesn't exist. So that's why it's relevant to include it in our instruments in policy. But also, when we have a just approach in these climate plans, of course, we recognize the need for approaches in which the community could be better and more meaningfully be engaged in these plans. And that's why I consider that this integration is one of the key opportunities. Only through culture, only through arts, only through this knowledge translation and knowledge integration, we could deliver meaningful execution of these plans. So that's why I will insist on this. It's not only a technical expertise, but it's the blending of this expertise with other knowledges what could deliver effective and creative actions.
I just want to add to that, if I can, really quickly, that something that came to my mind from what you're saying, Andrea. It's not one important thing that needs to happen is that culture isn't isolated, but is part of a dialogue, right? So if we think about just on the national level, I think what we need is dialogue between different ministries. They should talk to each other, the environmental, the cultural, and maybe educational. There should be some interministerial dialogue about that. It's not just culture that should be pushing its way into climate. There should be a mutual recognition of its importance and mutual support for collective action. And I think that goes from the national, we can zoom out from there as well. So I just wanted to highlight that so that we're not isolating culture as like its own, only its own pillar. It's part of everything. So let's talk about it in that way. Let's have a collective dialogue about it and how we can this inclusion, because it supports and enables everything else.
Well, thank you all so much for those wonderful inputs. I feel like I could talk to all three of you for 5 hours minimum, and there's really so much to cover and to unpack. But you've really shown us through the episodes the strength of the movement, and something that was mentioned very early on as well is that culture ultimately transcends time, and there's so much power in that. And looking at culture as well ultimately as a capacity building multiplier. So if you had just some final messages or food for thought to share for our listeners, what would those be, if there's anything that you'd like to add?
Culture lies at the heart of how societies understand and respond to the climate crisis. It shapes identities, informs our collective imagination, and it connects people together and also to the places that they're from. It's a fundamental component, a vital dimension of adaptation and our strategies on how to adjust toward and take action towards the climate crisis. And culture is a system of knowledge, of practices and expressions that allow us to design those strategies in a new way, not only technically, but also socially, and allow them to be grounded and human-centered. So that's, I think, just a few closing words from my side.
I think what Daniel said, he said it really well. I think it's just about looking at what we already have in our hands and what we already hold as, resistance, and really holding the blueprint for this resistance. And I think every form of art piece that we come through, we don't just really look at it with a superficial lens. We look at the pain behind it, we look at the hope behind it, we look at the story and the journey that comes with it, we look at the generations that has carried that substance that comes with it. It becomes that proof, that living proof that we've adapted before and we can again. It's just about bringing that level of intelligence and creativity and a solutionist mindset, that there is so much care in this movement. There is so much strength in this movement. And we're not just trying to become superheroes. We're not just trying to save the world, from evil demons or, villains or something. We're reimagining in how we can live together. And that in itself is just something very powerful. It's emotional, it's collective, it's human. What we're lacking right now is a lot of humanity in things. And that's where I see, the climate movement or the culture movement or any kind of human movement. It just needs more connection. It doesn't need a lot of more of the data. It just needs to have that connection.
Well said. On my side, just I want to thank all the people that are listening and doing their best efforts with the communities. This is very important to keep not only action going, but also motivation. And I think the key point of all this conversation is that only through culture we have hope, and that we cannot lose. So this will be a long-term effort, maybe, but it will help us to be more humble every day. So thank you all.
And on that helpful and very powerful note, we can close today's episode. But again, thank you all so much, Andrea, Gunjan, Daniel. And of course, thank you for our listeners for tuning in, and make sure you keep up with the other capacity building stories, Climate Action 101 episodes. See you on the next one.